a white stallion with eagle's wings, born from the severed neck of a monster, creator of sacred springs with a single strike of his hoof, rider of heroes, symbol of poets, bearer of Zeus's thunderbolts. Pegasus. Everyone knows the image, but almost no one knows the real story. Because here's what they don't tell you. Pegasus wasn't originally Greek. The myth hides references to real historical events, invasions, conquered peoples, and stolen gods. And the blood he's born from? That's not just poetic imagery. It's a clue to religious practices that would make modern audiences uncomfortable. The winged horse is beautiful, but the truth behind him is strange, violent, and utterly fascinating. First, let's establish what the ancient Greeks themselves said about Pegasus. The story comes primarily from Hesiod's Theogony, written around 700 BCE, and later from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Here's the tale. Medusa was once a beautiful maiden, a priestess in Athena's temple, but Poseidon, god of the sea, desired her. He violated her in Athena's sacred temple, a desecration that enraged the goddess. But instead of punishing Poseidon, Athena punished the victim. She transformed Medusa into a monster, hair of living snakes, bronze hands, golden wings, and a gaze that turned any living thing to stone. Medusa fled to the edge of the world, to a cave where she lived with her two immortal sisters, the Gorgons. Then came Perseus, the hero. Tasked with bringing back Medusa's head, he crept into her cave while she slept. Using a polished shield as a mirror to avoid her deadly gaze, he struck. One clean blow severed her head. And from her neck, from the spurting blood, sprang two beings, Chrysaor, a giant with a golden sword, and Pegasus, a magnificent white horse with eagle's wings. Why? Because Medusa was pregnant by Poseidon when she was transformed. The children had been trapped inside her monstrous form, and only her death could release them. Pegasus spread his wings and flew away, heading straight to Mount Helicon, home of the 9 muses who inspired all poetry, music, and arts. It's a striking image, but even in ancient times, people found this story strange. Pegasus's most famous adventure involves another hero, Bellerophon. Bellerophon was a prince who accidentally killed his brother and was exiled. He ended up in the court of King Priotus, whose wife Stheneboa fell in love with him. When Bellerophon rejected her advances, she falsely accused him of trying to seduce her. Priotus wanted Bellerophon dead, but couldn't kill a guest that would violate sacred hospitality laws. So he sent Bellerophon to his father-in-law, King Iobatus of Lycia, with a sealed letter. The letter said, "Kill the bearer of this message." Iobatus also couldn't simply murder a guest. So instead, he gave Bellerophon an impossible task: kill the Chimera. The Chimera was a monster with a lion's head, a goat body emerging from its back, and a serpent for a tail. It breathed fire and had been terrorizing the countryside. This is where Pegasus enters the story. A seer told Bellerophon he could only succeed with Pegasus's help. But the winged horse was wild, untamable. Bellerophon prayed to Athena, and the goddess gave him a golden bridle. With this magical equipment, Bellerophon captured Pegasus at the Pyrene Spring in Corinth. Together, they flew above the Chimera. From the air, Bellerophon shot arrows and hurled spears until the monster fell. It was the first aerial cavalry attack in mythological history. Bellerophon completed more tasks, fighting Amazons, battling neighboring kingdoms, always with Pegasus. He became famous, wealthy, and proud. Too proud. Bellerophon decided he deserved to live among the gods. He mounted Pegasus and tried to fly to Mount Olympus. Zeus, outraged at this arrogance, sent a gadfly to sting Pegasus. The horse bucked, and Bellerophon fell back to earth. Some versions say he died. Others say he survived, but spent the rest of his life crippled and wandering, hated by the gods. But what happened to Pegasus? He completed the journey to Olympus. Zeus welcomed him and gave him a job, carrying thunderbolts. The horse became immortal, living among the gods, and eventually Zeus transformed him into a constellation, the one we still see in the night sky. But there's another crucial part of Pegasus's mythology that often gets overlooked: his connection to sacred springs. The ancient sources tell us that wherever Pegasus struck his hoof, a spring would burst forth. The most famous was Hippocrene, horse spring, on Mount Helicon, home of the 9 muses who inspired all poetry, music, and arts. According to legend, the muses were singing in competition with the daughters of Pyrrhus. The mountain itself was so moved by the muses' song that it began to swell, growing toward heaven. Poseidon, worried the mountain would touch the sky, sent Pegasus to stop it. The winged horse struck the mountain with his hoof, and it stopped growing. But from that hoof strike came a spring of crystal-clear water. This wasn't just any water. Poets believed that drinking from Hippocrene would grant inspiration. The spring became sacred to poets, writers, and artists. To drink from Pegasus's spring meant to receive divine creative inspiration. There were other springs too. Pyrene in Corinth, where Bellerophon first captured Pegasus, was also said to have been created by the winged horse's hoof strike. Water, poetry, inspiration. These themes are woven throughout the Pegasus myth in ways that seem almost disconnected from the violence of his birth and the battles he fought. Why would a horse born from a decapitated monster become a symbol of artistic inspiration? Why would a creature associated with warfare also create springs sacred to poets? The answer requires us to go much deeper, past the Greek stories to their sources, because Pegasus, like so many Greek myths, wasn't originally Greek at all. Here's a fact that changes everything. The name Pegasus isn't Greek. Linguists have struggled with this word for a century. It doesn't follow standard Greek word formation patterns. The ending assos or assus is pre-Greek, probably from the language spoken in the Mediterranean before Greek-speaking people arrived. And there's more. Pegasus is most strongly associated with specific locations: Corinth, Lycia, and parts of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. These are regions that had their own civilizations and religions long before Greek culture dominated. Archaeological evidence shows that the image of horses with wings existed in the ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, Persia, Anatolia, centuries before it appeared in Greek art. We find winged horses carved on Hittite monuments, stamped on Assyrian seals, and painted on Persian pottery. The Greeks didn't invent the winged horse, they inherited it. But from whom? And what did it originally mean? The key lies in ancient Anatolia, the region we now call Turkey. The Hittite civilization, which flourished from roughly 1600 to 1200 BCE, had a storm god named Tarhunt. His sacred animal was the horse. He rode through the sky bringing rain, thunder, and lightning. And in some depictions, his horses have wings. Why? Because they're not just horses. They're storm clouds. Think about it. White horses galloping across the sky, bringing water, moving faster than any earthbound creature. To ancient people, watching massive storm systems roll across the landscape, the metaphor was perfect. The storm was a herd of celestial horses. This wasn't unique to the Hittites. The Vedic people of ancient India had the Ashvins, divine twin horsemen associated with dawn and light. The Persians had Pegasi, yes, plural, associated with their god Ahura Mazda. Throughout Indo-European mythology, horses are connected to the sky, storms, and divine power. But here's where it gets specific to Pegasus. In Hittite and Luwian texts, Luwian was another Anatolian language, there are references to a Pahasisi, a word that some scholars believe may be the origin of Pegasus. It seems to mean something like of the spring or of the lightning. Water and lightning, springs and storms. These elements are central to the Pegasus myth. Now let's talk about Medusa and the Gorgons, because they're also not originally Greek. The word Gorgon appears to come from an ancient Mediterranean root meaning terrible or fierce. But the imagery associated with Gorgons, the snaky hair, the wide eyes, the protruding tongue, matches ancient Near Eastern protective deities called Potnia Theron, or mistress of animals. These were powerful female deities worshipped across the pre-Greek Mediterranean. They were protectors, fierce and untamable, associated with wild nature. They appeared on buildings and shields to ward off evil. And here's the crucial point. When Greek-speaking people moved into the Mediterranean around 2000 to 1000 BCE, they encountered these goddess figures. The Greeks were a patriarchal culture with male sky gods dominating their pantheon. These powerful female figures threatened that order. So what did Greek mythology do? It turned them into monsters. The Gorgons became evil creatures that needed to be killed by male heroes. The protective goddesses became demons. This is called demonization, when a conquering culture takes the gods of the conquered and transforms them into villains. But traces of the original goddess remain. Athena, the Greek goddess who helps Perseus kill Medusa, then wears Medusa's head on her shield, the aegis. Why? Because originally they were probably aspects of the same deity. The snake-haired protective goddess became split into a good Greek goddess and a bad monster. Why is Pegasus born from blood? This isn't poetic flourish. It's a reference to actual ancient religious practices. Throughout the ancient Mediterranean and Near East, horse sacrifice was a profound religious ritual. Horses were expensive, prestigious animals. Sacrificing one was a massive offering to the gods. But it wasn't just any sacrifice. Archaeological evidence and ancient texts describe specific rituals where horses were sacrificed to bring rain, ensure fertility, or consecrate sacred spaces. In Vedic tradition, the Ashwamedha was an elaborate horse sacrifice performed by kings. In Greek tradition, horses were sacrificed to Poseidon, god of both the sea and horses. In Anatolia, horses were sacrificed to storm gods. The blood was crucial. It was collected, sprinkled on fields, poured into the earth. Blood was the life force, and returning it to the earth or offering it to the gods would bring blessing, including water, the essence of life. Now consider Pegasus, a divine horse that bursts into existence from spilled blood and whose primary power is creating springs of water. This isn't just mythology, it's a mythologized memory of actual religious practices. The story encodes an ancient belief. Horse blood brings water. Sacrifice brings blessing. The Greeks preserved the image but reframed it as a monster's death rather than a ritual sacrifice. The cultural memory remained, but its context was lost. Let's zoom out even further to the deepest roots of the myth. Indo-European people, the ancestors of Greeks, Romans, Celts, Germanic tribes, Persians, and Indians, all share certain mythological patterns. One of the most persistent is the divine horse associated with the sky. Comparative mythology reveals striking parallels. Greek, Pegasus, the winged horse of Zeus. Norse, Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse that travels between worlds. Hindu, the horses of Surya's chariot that pull the sun across the sky. Celtic, Epona, the horse goddess associated with sovereignty in the otherworld. Persian, the winged horses that pull the chariot of Mithra. These aren't coincidences, they're variations on an ancient theme that predates all these cultures, a Proto-Indo-European belief in celestial horses. Why horses? Because when Proto-Indo-European people domesticated horses around 4000 BCE on the Eurasian steppes, it was revolutionary. Horses provided speed, power, and mobility beyond anything humans had known. They were literally life-changing. So horses became sacred. They became associated with the most powerful forces: the sun, storms, divine kingship, the boundary between earth and heaven. Pegasus is the Greek version of this ancient archetype. He carries Zeus's lightning because he represents storm clouds. He creates springs because storms bring rain. He lives in the sky because that's where the divine horses have always lived in the imagination of Indo-European people. So if Pegasus comes from older, non-Greek traditions, why does the Greek myth place him so specifically in Corinth? The answer reveals how myths encode real history. Corinth was one of Greece's most important cities, famous for wealth, trade, and power. But it was also a cultural crossroads. Sitting on the narrow isthmus connecting mainland Greece to the Peloponnese, Corinth had two harbors, one facing east towards Asia, one facing west towards Italy. This meant constant contact with non-Greek people: Phoenicians, Anatolians, Egyptians, traders from across the Mediterranean. And here's the key detail. Corinth's symbol, stamped on their coins from the 6th century BCE onward, was Pegasus. Why? Because Corinth was claiming the myth as their own, connecting their city to divine power and ancient prestige. But they were claiming a symbol that had come from the East, from the Anatolian and Near Eastern cultures they traded with. The Pyrene Spring in Corinth, where Bellerophon supposedly captured Pegasus, was a real place, a sacred spring that predated Greek Corinth. It was likely a holy site for whatever pre-Greek people lived there first. The Greeks built their city around it and incorporated its sanctity into their own mythology. Pegasus became Greek through this process, even though his origins were elsewhere. The story of Bellerophon fighting the Chimera takes place in Lycia, a kingdom in southwestern Anatolia, modern Turkey. This isn't coincidence. Lycia was a real place with a non-Greek culture. The Lycians spoke their own language, had their own gods, and their own traditions. They also had a strong tradition of horse breeding and horsemanship. When the Greeks told stories of Bellerophon going to Lycia, they were processing real cultural encounters. Greek heroes going east, encountering foreign kingdoms, facing strange creatures. This was mythologized colonization and trade contact. The Chimera itself is fascinating, a hybrid monster combining a lion, goat, and serpent. These were all animals sacred to different Near Eastern deities. The Chimera might represent the foreign, incomprehensible religions the Greeks encountered in Anatolia. Multiple gods and practices all blended together into something that seemed monstrous to Greek eyes. Bellerophon defeating the Chimera with Pegasus's help is symbolically a Greek hero using a sacred symbol, the winged horse, to conquer foreign elements. It's cultural appropriation mythologized as heroic adventure. And the detail that Bellerophon needed Athena's golden bridle to capture Pegasus, that represents Greek rationality and wisdom, Athena controlling and civilizing wild Eastern power, Pegasus. But here's where the myth takes an unexpected turn. Over centuries, Pegasus transformed from a warrior's mount to a poet's symbol. How did this happen? It starts with those springs. Mount Helicon, home of the Muses, was a real mountain in Boeotia, Greece. There were real springs there, and they were genuinely considered sacred to poetry and the arts. The ancient Greeks believed that inspiration came from outside the self. Poets didn't create, they channeled. The muses whispered stories into their ears. Divine water gave them visions and words. Pegasus, creating Hippocrene, the horse spring, connected the animal to artistic inspiration. The swift flight of the winged horse became a metaphor for the imagination taking flight. The waters he created became the source of poetic genius. By the Roman period, Pegasus was more associated with poets than warriors. The Roman poet Horace wrote about mounting Pegasus, attempting great poetry. The winged horse became shorthand for ambitious artistic effort. This transformation reveals something profound. Myths aren't static, they evolve as cultures change. The warrior culture that needed a divine battle mount eventually gave way to a more settled, literate culture that valued art and poetry. Pegasus evolved with them. The violent birth from a monster's blood faded in importance. The beautiful image of a white horse with wings flying to mountains where artists gather became the lasting symbol. Finally, Pegasus ascends to heaven and becomes a constellation, a story that reveals ancient astronomy and the night sky's role in mythology. The constellation Pegasus is genuinely ancient. It's one of the 48 constellations listed by the Greco-Roman astronomer Ptolemy in the 2nd century CE, but it's far older. The quadrangle of 4 bright stars that form the horse's body is distinctive and easy to spot in the autumn sky. Ancient people across the Mediterranean recognized this pattern, though they saw different figures in it. The Babylonians saw it as part of a field constellation. Other cultures saw it as a chariot or a building, but the Greeks saw a horse, specifically the winged horse Pegasus. Placing Pegasus in the sky did several things. First, it immortalized him. Heroes die, but constellations are eternal. By becoming stars, Pegasus transcended his mythology and became part of the cosmic order. Second, it connected him forever to Zeus and divine power. The sky was Zeus's domain. Pegasus carrying Zeus's thunderbolts and then becoming stars made him a permanent servant of the supreme god. Third, it served a practical function. The constellation Pegasus rises in autumn when rains begin in the Mediterranean. Once again, the winged horse is associated with water and storms, his ancient role. Ancient sailors used Pegasus to navigate. Farmers used its rising to time their planting. The myth became woven into practical life. And something beautiful happened. Every autumn, when Pegasus rises in the east, people look up and remember. The story continues to be told, written in stars. When Rome conquered Greece, they inherited Greek mythology, but they adapted it. To the Romans, Pegasus represented fame and glory. The Latin word fama, fame, was personified as a goddess with wings, and she often rode Pegasus or appeared alongside him. Roman emperors used Pegasus imagery on coins and monuments to suggest divine favor and eternal renown. Military units adopted him as a symbol. Temples featured his image. But the Romans also started to commercialize the myth. Pegasus appeared on shop signs, tavern emblems, and trade goods. He was becoming a brand, a logo, recognizable and associated with quality and prestige. This might seem like degrading a sacred symbol, but it actually shows how deeply Pegasus had penetrated Mediterranean culture. He was no longer just a religious figure from Greek temples. He was part of everyday life, understood and valued across the empire. Roman poets like Ovid retold and elaborated on the Pegasus myth, adding psychological depth to Bellerophon's hubris and making the story more about human character than divine intervention. The myth was becoming literature, entertainment, and moral lesson, all at once. When Rome fell, you might think Pegasus would fade into obscurity. Early Christians weren't particularly interested in pagan gods, but Pegasus survived by changing meaning again. Medieval Christians reinterpreted classical myths as allegories. Pegasus became a symbol of several things: the human soul ascending to heaven, Christ himself bridging earth and heaven, spiritual contemplation and meditation, the flight of prayer toward God. Medieval bestiaries, books describing real and mythical animals, included Pegasus alongside lions, eagles, and unicorns. They explained his true Christian meaning, divorcing him from his pagan origins. Artists painted Pegasus in religious manuscripts. He appeared in church decorations. The image persisted, even as its meaning transformed completely. And something else happened. Pegasus entered heraldry. Noble families across Europe adopted him for their coats of arms. He represented nobility, purity, swiftness, and divine favor. The Inner Temple, one of London's Inns of Court where lawyers trained, adopted Pegasus as their symbol, representing the flight of eloquence and legal rhetoric. Once again, Pegasus proved adaptable. The myth survived because it could be reshaped to fit new cultures and belief systems. The Renaissance brought a massive revival of classical learning, and Pegasus galloped back into prominence. Artists like Raphael, Rubens, and countless others painted Pegasus, often with the Muses on Mount Helicon. He became a favorite subject because he represented the Renaissance ideal, the union of power, the horse, and grace, the wings, of earthly strength and heavenly inspiration. Poets and writers adopted Pegasus as their patron symbol. Literary societies called themselves Orders of Pegasus or Academies of the Winged Horse. Publishing houses used him as their logo, a tradition that continues to this day. Why did Pegasus resonate so powerfully with Renaissance thinkers? Because the Renaissance was about revival, bringing ancient wisdom back to life. Pegasus, who never died but was immortalized in the stars, was the perfect symbol for this cultural rebirth. And the Renaissance made Pegasus beautiful. Earlier medieval depictions were often crude, functional, but Renaissance artists created images of breathtaking elegance, muscular white horses with eagle wings, caught mid-flight, ethereal and powerful. These are the images that shaped our modern conception of Pegasus. When you picture the winged horse today, you're probably seeing him through Renaissance eyes. Today, Pegasus is everywhere, and I mean everywhere. He's the logo of Mobil Oil, Pegasus in red symbolizing power and speed. He appears in films from Disney's Hercules to Clash of Titans. He's in video games, fantasy novels, comic books, and countless advertisements. But here's what's remarkable. Despite all this commercialization, Pegasus still carries his ancient meanings. When we see a winged horse, we still think of freedom, transcendence, and inspiration. We still associate him with poetry and imagination. We still feel that thrill of something earthly breaking free and taking flight. Modern therapeutic riding programs sometimes use Pegasus imagery to inspire children with disabilities. The idea that limitations can be overcome, that flight is possible even when it seems impossible. Poets still invoke Pegasus when writing about inspiration and creative struggle. The image remains powerful. And in an age where we've achieved literal flight, where humans have walked on the moon, Pegasus reminds us that imagination got there first. Thousands of years before airplanes, humans dreamed of flying horses. The myth preceded the technology. So what does the journey of Pegasus, from Anatolian storm god's horse to global symbol, teach us? First, that myths are alive. They're not fixed stories from the past. They evolve, adapt, and survive by changing meaning while retaining powerful imagery. Pegasus began as a representation of storm clouds and rain. He became a warrior's mount, then a poet's inspiration, then a Christian allegory, then a Renaissance ideal, now a commercial logo and pop culture icon. At each stage, people took what they needed from the myth and reshaped it. The core image, a horse with wings, was flexible enough to carry countless meanings. Second, that myths encode history. The story of Pegasus preserves memories of pre-Greek Mediterranean religions, Indo-European sacred horse traditions, cultural contact between Greeks and Anatolians, ancient ritual practices involving horse sacrifice, the importance of springs and water sources in Bronze Age civilizations. By studying the myth carefully, we can reconstruct history that wasn't written in any other form. Third, that beauty endures. The reason Pegasus survived isn't just utility or meaning, it's that the image itself is beautiful. A white horse with wings caught mid-flight is objectively striking. It appeals to something fundamental in human aesthetics. We're drawn to hybrids that combine strength and grace, earth and sky, the possible and the impossible. Pegasus gives form to our dreams of transcendence. Pegasus was never meant to be real. The ancient Greeks knew he was a myth. They didn't believe there were actually winged horses flying around. The stories were always symbolic, metaphorical, meaningful rather than literal. But, and this is crucial, the things Pegasus represented were absolutely real. The power of storms to bring life-giving rain, the speed and beauty of horses, the way inspiration feels like flight, the human longing to transcend physical limitations, the connection between violence and creation, destruction and birth, the mystery of where ideas come from. These are real experiences, real emotions, real aspects of the human condition. Pegasus gave them shape. He gave people a way to talk about things that are hard to express in plain language. That's what myths do. They're not lies. They're not false. They're a different kind of truth. Poetic truth. Symbolic truth. When a poet says they're mounting Pegasus, they're not lying. They're using mythological language to describe the real experience of creative inspiration. When we see a winged horse and feel wonder, that feeling is real, even if the creature isn't. Pegasus has been giving humans a language for transcendence for at least 3,000 years. That's real magic. We've traced Pegasus from the steppes where Indo-Europeans first made horses sacred, through the kingdoms of ancient Anatolia where winged horses represented storm gods, into Greek culture where he was born from a monster's blood, through Rome where he became fame personified, through medieval Christianity where he became a holy symbol, through the Renaissance where he was reborn as art, and into our modern world where he remains instantly recognizable. The winged horse from Medusa's blood isn't just a story. He's a timeline of human civilization, a carrier of meaning that adapts to each age while remaining fundamentally himself. And the beautiful thing is, Pegasus is still flying. The myth isn't over. Every time someone creates art, writes a poem, or dreams of breaking free from limitation, they're invoking the ancient power of that white horse spreading his wings. The next time you see Pegasus, on a book cover, in a film, in the autumn night sky, remember, you're looking at layers of history. You're seeing Hittite storm gods, Greek heroes, Anatolian goddesses, Roman poets, Christian mystics, Renaissance artists, and modern dreamers all at once. You're seeing humanity's eternal attempt to give wings to its horses and make the impossible beautiful. And that's the real magic. Not that Pegasus ever existed, but that we've needed him to exist for thousands of years, and we still do. Thank you for watching Living Horse. If this deep dive into mythology and equestrian history fascinated you, there's so much more to explore on this channel. Until next time, take care.